Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. Shaka is here live today, and a warm welcome to all our Facebook followers watching us live on Facebook. Before we start, hello Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific, of course, to be in the second week, my friend, of a new year.
Interesting. This New Year seems to be starting on a very good spot, but in some places in Africa, there are a lot of contentious issues. Let's go maybe to Kenya. Things haven't been that good in Kenya. Yes, we have a new government in place. President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto were sworn in, but the political dust hasn't settled. Raila is still making noise here and there. He's saying that he's going to be sworn in on the 30th of January. A lot of people are talking about it, but personally, I think this is a non-starter. Your thoughts?
I don't know why you call it a non-starter, because obviously the last time I checked, you and I are not prophets. So there's no way...
I didn't claim I was a prophet, Shaka.
There's no way we can possibly read the future. I think that our role is observers and monitors. And we basically have to listen to what some of those people who are making news, what they are saying, and whether in fact, at the end of the day, whether they can translate their rhetoric into action or practice. So I think that the jury is still out. I have heard, of course, and read that Raila expects to be sworn in as the people's president, as you correctly said, on January 30th. We don't know whether that is going to happen or not happen, but it is also conditional, mind you, because they are also hoping that there will be a very significant dialogue between the ruling party Jubilee, led of course by President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. So let's wait and see, because let's face it, it even doesn't look good, in fact, in Jubilee territory, because there seems to be, in fact, a split between Uhuru Kenyatta and the Deputy President, William Ruto, in terms of the appointing of a new cabinet.
Shaka, what do you make of this argument? There are a lot of people out there who say that, for example, Raila Odinga was given a chance to participate in the elections that preceded the one that was annulled by the Supreme Court. But he overplayed his hand, or I would use maybe a sports analogy. He played the wrong hand and things didn't work out. So in my view, he committed political suicide. He should have actually gone for it and maybe seen what would have happened.
I don't know that I can really reach the same conclusion as you, because I look at the facts and they seem to tell me something different. It is true that he had a chance, especially given the, was it the September 1st Supreme Court ruling, which annulled the August 8th election, and there was supposed to be a repeat election within 60 days. The problem here, my brother, is that the IEBC, which obviously was implicated in rigging the election or mishandling the election, was the same institution that was going to carry out precisely the same exercise with absolutely no change. The Supreme Court, for example, ordered the IEBC to make sure that the server which contained the results of the August 8th election, to be opened, to be available, to be accessed by NASA agents, to be accessed by the Supreme Court agents and what have you. And guess what? Up to today, the server has not been made available to those parties, which means, frankly, the Supreme Court should have in fact found the IEBC in contempt of court. It never did that. And of course, you know how President Kenyatta reacted upon hearing that his election had actually been annulled. You know how he talked about these wakora, these thugs that are supposed to be judges and all that kind of stuff, and that when he gets another chance, he will fix them. And you know what happened just a day, I think, before the repeat election of October 26. You know that the driver / bodyguard of the Deputy Chief Justice of the Kenyan Supreme Court was actually shot. You also know that the Deputy Chief Justice was actually detained at her house in Karen. She was also, in fact, her telephone had been taken away and what have you. She couldn't communicate. And you know that the Chief Justice tried to come and have what you'd call a quorum. He couldn't actually get a quorum of at least 5 judges. He ended up having, in fact, himself and another person. And you know, the rest is history. So you're not talking here about an environment, frankly, that even allowed the almighty Supreme Court to conduct its business the way it should, because it is supposed to be part of an independent branch of government that has equal powers with the executive and with the legislature. It didn't happen.
But how about people who argue, for example, and say that the optics looked good for Raila? The fact that he had managed to get the Supreme Court to annul that election, things were looking good for him. He had the political upper hand in that election.
The appearances.
Yes.
The appearances, but the IEBC remained subordinate to the chief executive. And as a matter of fact, the key guy, Ezra Chiroba himself, who was the CEO of the, in fact, of that body, you remember, he was still part of the group. This is a man who disregarded whatever, in fact, instructions he was even receiving, reportedly, from the chairman of the IEBC, Mr. Chebukati. So let's face it, Mr. Chiroba and 3 other commissioners used to apparently report to State House. They would get instructions from there, and in fact, they would just go back and do exactly the bidding of the chief executive. So let's face it, nothing really changed. You wanted simply for Raila Odinga essentially to accompany Uhuru Kenyatta, rather than, in fact, Uhuru Kenyatta perhaps ending up, in fact, having a contest between Uhuru and Kenyatta, which seemed to have happened on October 26.
I beg to differ because from the look of things, it looks like, in my view, again, Raila overplayed his hand. He thought by calling on his supporters not to go and participate in the election, he would actually win. But it turned out that was a big political failure on his part.
I don't know where you get that really, because let's face it, in fact,
they're both my friends.
In fact, forget about even friendship. The fact of the matter is that the people that did not vote actually won.
How?
Because let's face it,
how?
There is incontrovertible evidence that you did not have more than 3.5 million people who actually went to vote. And the results took like almost a week in order for people to come up with some kind of figure, which means they were doctoring results and what have you, and eventually they simply doubled that particular number. But let's face it, how come this man won the election on October 26, and we are now in the second week of January 2018, he has no cabinet? Do you know why? Because he clearly knows that he has no legitimacy. It is one thing to be legal. It is another thing to be legitimate. Because while you may force someone to do certain things legally by using the means of coercion, like the police, the intelligence, and what have you, unfortunately, there is nothing you can do to force somebody to essentially look at you legitimately. You cannot force someone to actually love you. You cannot force somebody to look at you as a legitimate leader of his choice.
But Raila is trying to use the same game here. He's trying to have himself sworn in at the end of the month.
My brother.
I don't see a scenario where he's going to actually succeed.
My brother.
Because take, for example, what happened in Uganda. The opposition leader in Uganda, Dr. Kizza Besigye, right after the election, he was sworn in as another president. But what has that done for him?
And in the hearts of a lot of people, by the way, he is their president. I have run into people who actually told me in Kampala, the Ugandan capital, that their president is Kizza Besigye. You see, again, you have to accept the fact that there's a difference between legality and legitimacy. And legitimacy, again, as I said, is not something you can force somebody down the throat. You can't force legitimacy. You can't force anybody to respect you. That one has come outside, within, themselves and what have you, based on their beliefs and what have you. So let's face it, politics is a very interesting game, but you have to know also that society is not static. It is dynamic. And that is why, in fact, when it comes to politics, anybody who knows anything about politics will tell you there are no permanent friends or permanent adversaries in politics. They are merely permanent interests. And whenever the interests actually change, the alliances also keep shifting. And as we talk today, there is no doubt in my mind, from what I have read, from what I see, from what I hear, that part of the reason why Kenyatta up to today does not have a cabinet in place is precisely because he's looking for ways and means of reaching out to some of Raila's colleagues so that he can, one, undermine him politically, and two, get that thing that is elusive right now, legitimacy. Because the country is divided. The mood is not a normal situation, my brother.
Yeah, Shaka, let's go to an interesting comment here from Shadri Kabyala Dembe. Shaka, you are forgetting that many people voted not because they were intimidated by Raila's group. The IBEC took equipment and destroyed it.
I beg your pardon?
He's saying that you are forgetting that many people voted not because they were intimidated by Raila's group, right? Because Raila's group also intimidated people.
I don't really understand the question, because you can't say many people voted.
No. He's suggesting that a lot of people turned out to vote despite the fact that they were intimidated by Raila's group.
Oh, there were very many, as I said. 3.5 million people.
Yeah, but he's discounting the
No, he doesn't have the evidence. Where's the evidence?
Do you have evidence?
Of course I do have the evidence. What I am saying is a reflection of the evidence that in fact is in the public arena. It is in the public arena. He should go actually and check his records himself.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go to another comment. Let's go to, this is an interesting one. This is an unusual question from Frank Nwamanya. He says, what role do artists like musicians, poets, actors, and others play in the management of our societies, and how significant are they in Africa? He also gives an example of during the apartheid era, we had the likes of Amelia Makeba, Hugh Masekela, who played a very significant role. Even in West Africa, we had like Salif Keita. Those people played a significant role in changing the politics of their countries. Your thoughts, Shaka?
To add to that, in fact, those two very important artists that you mentioned, Miriam Makeba and Hugh Masekela, who actually happens to be a friend, and I haven't talked to him for a very long time, but I remember last time when I had a one-on-one on Straight Talk Africa Live from Johannesburg. They had friends also in the international community. We're talking about Simon and Garfunkel, the American great artists who actually came in to support them. You could also take it to Nigeria, where you had people like Femi, Anakulipo Kuti, you know, that kind of stuff.
The great, yeah.
Precisely. In Uganda, you have a one-man called Bobi Wine. These are obviously doing exactly what artists are expected to do, which is providing a voice to the voiceless, not massaging the egos of the status quo. Because there is such a thing as artists actually playing a role of being agents of social change. Agents of social change, because they are supposed to be narrators of society, like spokespeople of society. Rather than playing a role of agents of social control. It's again, as I said, massaging the egos of dictators, of the status quo, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's very unfortunate that in a country like Uganda, honestly, the majority of the well-known musicians are not doing precisely what they are expected to do, which is to actually become agents of social change, as opposed to playing the role of agents of social control. You only have Bobby Wine.
Well, one could argue that musicians express themselves in whichever way they want. What's wrong with them expressing views that favor the government?
Yeah, but you know what? At the end of the day, who is the government? The people. The sovereign remains with the people. And musicians are supposed to be essentially narrators, spokespeople of the people, not an institution as a government. And especially if that particular institution lacks democratic credentials. You're talking about a despotic type of institution, really. And some of these musicians that you are talking about, actually, you know, they receive money from the government in order to support it, in order to become like the cheerleaders, really, or cheer singers of a government, for that matter, to such an extent that at one time, some of them even helped Yoweri Museveni actually to become like a rap star and all that kind of stuff. You remember that?
Mm-hmm. The debate is generating a lot of interest. They want us to go back and talk about this specification is from Muzilimi, storyteller. He says, Shaka, do you think Mwalimu Seif should have done the same as Odinga is threatening to do, to swear in as the people's president in Tanzania?
I beg your pardon?
Mwalimu
Seif Sharif Hamadi of Zanzibar.
Of Zanzibar.
Oh, yeah, he probably should have if he had a way to do it, because let's face it, there's no question in any reasonable person's mind that Seif Sharif Hamadi actually has won the last elections running away in Zanzibar. But each time he wins, CCM, Chukua Chako Mapema, declares victory. And sometimes it's very embarrassing because they actually have to deploy openly soldiers from the Tanzania People's Defense Force to sustain that kind of declaration.
Let's go to another Facebook comment. Let's go to Telma Latungu wants to know if Africa is truly in the right direction with the imposed democracy on them. What's your opinion on governance by monarchs?
You know, first of all, the first part of the question, frankly, implies that there is democracy in most of Africa, which is not true. I don't think that you can actually get more than 15 countries out of 55 member countries of the African Union which sincerely display at least some fundamentals or the basics that make up what you would consider to be democracy. Now, when you talk about democracy, I think you would be talking about fairness. I don't think, frankly, you should expect anybody from another culture to export fairness to you. We're talking about justice. When you talk about justice, these are universal values. There are certain values that are universal, that obtain anywhere where there are human beings. So I think that it is not the type, for example, of what a former Tanzanian president, Benjamin Mkapa, used to call the Coca-Cola type of democracy. No. There are certain values that are universal.
Yeah.
And then when you talk about monarchy, let's face it, if you talk about a monarchy by pretty much really by definition, a monarchy is a dictatorship. But it is a dictatorship that has been in place for a very long time and has had the benefit, for example, of socialization, which comes through educational curriculum and what have you. And people from the time they are young, they are being told that this is the man or this is the queen. But there are also some monarchies which have since been transformed into constitutional monarchs, like the United Kingdom, for example. You do have a monarchy which is largely symbolic, but in fact, in terms of the governance of society and what have you, you're talking about democracy. But then you could also look in Africa, you have two probably remaining absolute monarchs. You have Swaziland, where you can't even pretend to have an election, as a matter of fact. And then you have Morocco. Morocco is something in between because, yes, it is a monarchy, but it also allows some very specific democratic institutions to function. And there is no question that there's a semblance of democracy in the Kingdom of Morocco.
Let's move along. Let's go to Shamahel Kakoma in Zambia. He wants to know, what do you think? Do you think that we have more dictators in Africa than any other continent? If so, why?
I honestly, first of all, don't know. I need to do my homework in order to perhaps be in a position to answer that question very accurately. But if I could make some kind of guesstimate, so to speak, it would seem to me that right now we seem to be competing at least against the Middle East. And if you look at the countries in the Middle East, they are not as many as the countries in Africa. So it's quite possible that we do have more dictators on the African continent. And the question as to why, I think it is really very simple. I think part of the problem is that we do have a population that is not socially and politically conscious. And part of the reason, obviously, is because there has not really been a government or institutions that promote, I think, the idea of civic education so that people can know exactly what their rights are and so that they can legitimately assert them. Now, you may say, of course, that, there are radio stations, there are television stations, newspapers, and what have you. People should be able to read and write. But let's face it, in a lot of African countries, people do not have those type of skills of reading or listening, and later on making interpretations, analysis, and what have you, and figuring out what is in their best interests. So I think Africa needs, for example, a free press, free media. It also needs a government, or at least civic society organizations, which can, begin to promote this idea of civic education so that people can begin to know their rights, to know that they are actually citizens who have inalienable rights, and that they owe allegiance to the state, which is made up of them, rather than, in fact, owing allegiance to an individual authority who is like a presidential monarch, a dictator, a king, a queen, or that kind of stuff, and they do not have, subjects do not have rights. They have privileges, which, by the way, are granted to them in return by those individual leaders, or rulers, in fact, perhaps even more accurately, who run the affairs of the state in those particular countries where there are no citizens, but subjects. But of course, you may also say, let's face it, there have been situations where there is a semblance of democracy, and therefore people have all the appearances of institutions that reflect democratic societies, but yet some of these strong men, where there are no strong institutions, succeed in transforming their citizens, really, into the role, or playing the role of subjects, subject to them.
Are you at liberty? There's a Facebook comment here that wants you to either to say whether at liberty to name some of those dictators that you're talking about.
It's very simple. The first one, in fact, is a man called Theodore Obiang Basongo of Equatorial Guinea. The second one is Paul Biya of Cameroon. The third one is Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. And the fourth could be al-Bashir of Sudan, Salva Kiir of South Sudan. You could talk about Paul Kagame of Rwanda. You could talk, there are so many across the continent. In fact, there are more dictators, especially in Central Africa, Eastern Africa, than in West Africa, Southern Africa, and North Africa, to be honest with you, rolled into one. You could also talk about, for example, the Zambian president, Edgar Lungu. We were there in August. We saw it all. I'm afraid that even a man like John Pombe Magufuli, who initially looked like he was a new kind of like breed of African leadership, it seems to me that he seems to be crossing the line. Even though earlier today I saw him, in fact, in a very beautiful picture with the man who tried to become the president, riding, with Chadema. I'm talking about Mr. Ruasa, Edward Ruasa. They had a very beautiful picture. I don't know whether you saw it in the East African.
What are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow it's very interesting, a little bit different, but we're talking about an incredible lady born in Ethiopia to a senior military officer. Her name is Yaharawak Gashau. I used to see her on billboards on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles when I was at UCLA. She used to be one of the greatest, one of the most adored models coming out of the African continent and working internationally. She first became a model in Paris and then eventually moved to New York, and she now lives in Dallas in the state of Texas. She is a Pan-Africanist. She is an activist. She's all sorts of things rolled into one. I can't wait sincerely to have one-on-one with Yaharawak Gashau.
Well, Shaka, we seem to be running out of time. Thank you again for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time next week. And to you, all our viewers, we say thank you and keep bringing those comments. Remember, Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself. Once again, so long from Washington.